Hello, and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I have been studying relationships for over 20 years as a couples therapist, a professor, an award-winning author, and as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Now, I'm inviting you into this space each week as I dig into some of the toughest and most fascinating relational dilemmas of our time. If you want to discover how to create vibrant and loving relationships in your own life, you have come to the right place. This is Reimagining Love. Hi there. Welcome back to Reimagining Love. So, I am wondering, my dear listener, are you stressed? Well, according to physician and stress expert, Dr. Aditi Nerurkar's research, the answer is most likely, yes. Whether that's due to pressure at work, the unrelenting deluge of news, care responsibilities, or relationship challenges, or maybe just like all of the above, it's understandable that most of us feel overwhelmed. But when old coping strategies aren't working anymore and life is feeling unmanageable, it takes a toll on our brains, on our bodies, and on our longevity. Dr. Aditi joins me on today's episode for a transformative conversation centered on her best-selling book, The 5 Resets: Rewire Your Brain and Body for Less Stress and More Resilience. Dr. Aditi is a Harvard stress expert, medical doctor, and researcher who's committed to offering actionable, practical, and science-backed approaches to reimagining your relationship with everyday stress and burnout. We discuss the solutions that she shares in her book, which will empower you to develop the right kind of resilience, the kind that allows you to move through challenges with patience and stability. And Dr. Aditi also shares her 3-second brain reset. Stop, breathe, be, for you all to try out. All this and so much more in the episode ahead. Enjoy. Dr. Aditi, thank you so much for being here today with me on Reimagining Love. It's so good to be with you.
I am such a fan of your work. It is a true honor to join you.
Oh, well, I'm really glad that you're here. Your book is fantastic. I am so excited to be introducing it to my students and my clients. It really is so good. Thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you. And you and your work, it's like you're such an inspiration to so many, including me. And it's just such a joy to be in conversation with you about the 5 resets and everything we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, let's start with you. So the question that I love to ask guests at the top of the show is, how are you reimagining love in one of your important relationships these days?
I knew you were going to ask this question, Alexandra. And one idea that, so I've been really thinking about this, like, what is she going to ask me and who's that person? And when I was really reflecting on, is it husband, children, family members, colleagues, friends? I think the relationship that I continually try to work on and allow to evolve is the relationship I have with myself, to be honest. And really leaning into this idea of self-compassion and giving myself lots of grace in the process of making mistakes and trying new things and failing or succeeding or a combination of the two. That's where I landed after reflecting on that a little bit.
More grace, more room to try with less attachment to the outcome, hey? So is that you recovering from a sense of like sort of perfectionism or being so invested in productivity? Like what is that healing inside of you as you give yourself some more space and some more grace?
Well, it's been something that I've been working on for a very long time. And when I was doing research for the 5 Resets, my book, is when I really dug into the science of self-compassion and what it does for your brain and your body and why it's so, so important. And particularly when you're feeling a sense of stress or burnout, or like you said, high productivity, all of these things, it increases the volume of your amygdala, which is the small almond shaped structure deep in your brain that is focused on survival and self preservation and cave person mode. And when you really lean into self compassion, having a state of, more grace and openness and acceptance with yourself, leaning into self compassion decreases the volume of your amygdala. And so it makes you speak kinder to yourself. That inner critic decreases. So it's not to say, Alexandra, that anything particular happened or there was like a particular moment. But I think in learning, there's many ways. Like I try to be a forever student. So whether it be exercise or diet or sleep or relationships and connection, I always try to level up. And so in this particular way, I don't know if I was really focusing on self-compassion in the same way as I have in these other spheres. And so I've been really thinking about creating a better relationship with myself simply because I want to enjoy this journey that I am on with this being a new author, the media work that I do, the health communication work that I do. And I think it's so easy when you are doing this public facing work, as you are as well, to fall prey, not from your own volition, it's just all around us in the ether of just, head down, keep going, achievement. And I just wanted to stop and just look around a little and, take stock. And so having a sense of self-compassion has helped me do that. It's also decreasing my stress in the moment so that I can continue to do the work that I want to do.
That's fantastic. I think it's what makes you such a powerful spokesperson in this area is that you have very traditional medical training, a very traditional academic and, sort of quote unquote hard science background. And here you are talking about self-compassion. And, it ought to be an easy sell for all of us to work on self-compassion. But I do think that when you connect the dots in that way, around the brain science, it's not something soft or something that is, cutting yourself, making excuses for yourself. It truly, truly is how we care for our brains and our bodies and our longevity. So I really appreciate you connecting the dots in that way to make such an effective argument. For anybody, who maybe is a little skeptical on this whole be nice to ourselves idea, right?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. The science to me is so fascinating, the science of the brain and the body, neuroplasticity, which simply means that your brain is a muscle like your biceps. So, what you do during the day, your behaviors, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your daily habits and activities can actually rewire your brain. And so that's the big premise of most of my work and also the 5 resets. It's just this idea of neuroplasticity, that your brain is a muscle, always evolving. It's not like the old thinking, which was, the brain you got at birth is the brain you got for life. It's a real grab bag. It's more so that you have the ability and the power to rewire your brain. So I think about that a lot. I certainly walk the talk. And I think that many physicians feel the same way, but aren't necessarily able to articulate it or just don't have the space because most doctors, as we know, based on the data, work to actually do a doctor's job and do it well, you have to work 27 hours a day. And so I've transitioned now to I stopped seeing patients and I now primarily teach medical students. So I have more time to do this health communication work. But thank you for saying that. I think there's real science and, this soft stuff can really have a hard effect on the bottom line.
Well, and unfortunately, you're naming like the systemic factors here. And you cite in the book a really worrisome finding that strikes at, to me, the core of the systemic nature of what you are addressing in your book, which is that stress plays a role in nearly 80% of doctors' visits. But you cite that only 3% of doctors offer stress management counseling. So the system is broken, and that's what you are trying to help us look at and think about, right?
That's right. So this was also, like you, a startling statistic when I read it. I read it early in my medical training. 60 to 80% of all primary care visits have a stress related component. And then my research found that only 3% of doctors counsel for stress, which is just the vast gap that is, and also an opportunity to close that gap is what my work really focuses on. That's not to say 60 to 80% of doctors' visits are caused by stress. So in this particular instance, Stress is correlated with and not necessarily causative, right? So there's a difference there. But when you say 60 to 80% of all doctor's visits have a stress-related component, that's like saying, when you have a headache or abdominal pain or chest pain or breathing problems and you go to your doctor, they do the full workup and say, everything's fine. It's probably just stress. Stress in medical terms is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning we have to rule everything out. And then we say, oh, it's most likely stress. And in fact, I can share my own personal story. How I became a doctor with an expertise in stress is that I was a stressed patient looking for answers. And in the same way, I went to go see my doctor. I had a stampede of wild horses across my chest. I was working 80 hours a week in the cardiac ICU, taking care of everyone's hearts and not really thinking about my own. And so I developed a stampede of wild horses across my chest. It was terrifying and knocked the wind out of me. And so I went to go see a doctor after several weeks of just, toughing it through. It never happened again at work, but it always happened right before I was going to bed. And my doctor did the full medical workup, tested for my thyroid, anemia, heart, echocardiogram, which is a heart ultrasound, EKG, you name it, she tested it. Everything came back normal. And so she was like, oh, it's most likely just stress. Try to relax some more. I know it's hard. Medical training, we've all been there. And so in that same way, that is what many patients are told. They go in for a particular symptom and the full workup is done. Of course, you have to go see your doctor if you have any symptoms. But if you are told, hey, it's not everything checked out fine, it's probably just stress, then there is more work to be done because unfortunately, like you say, Alexandra, in the context of the medical system, stress is still very nebulous and vague. It's not that doctors don't recognize stress as the elephant in the exam room. Of course they do, as do patients. It's simply that the medical system isn't set up to address stress head on. Doctors are managing so many things. A study found that for a doctor to do their job well, it would take 27 hours a day. So this is not an individual failing. This is a system-wide failing. And so I hope my work helps to address that gap between that 60 to 80% of visits and only 3% of doctors who offer counseling.
The subtitle of your book is Rewire Your Brain and Body for Less Stress and More Resilience. Will you tell us about why you use the term resilience rather than something else, more joy, more strength? Like, what is it about? What does resilience capture and why is that our target as we heal our stress?
Oh my God. I love this question. It might be one of my most favorite questions anyone's ever asked me. When I was toying with the idea of whether or not to use that word resilience, it almost feels like this question was planted, but really it wasn't. Like you just asked me this spontaneously. I agonized over that word, Alexandra, because resilience, when you hear the word or when I hear the word, I bristle. I have a visceral response. It's so cringeworthy. I'm like, don't tell me to be more resilient. And that is because societally, particularly now at this moment in time, we have embraced this idea of toxic resilience, which is not true resilience. True resilience is your innate biological ability to adapt, recover, and grow in the face of life's challenges. True resilience honors your boundaries, understands your human limitations, and celebrates your ability to say no when appropriate. Toxic resilience, on the other hand, is a mind over matter mindset. It's productivity at all costs, and it doesn't understand your human need for rest and recovery. Every society has its own version of toxic resilience. In the US, we have the Energizer Bunny, just keep going. In the UK, it's keep calm and carry on. And so I really agonized of like, do I use this word or not? But ultimately, I decided to lean into putting that word in in the subtitle. So the full title of the book is The 5 Resets, Rewire Your Brain for Less Stress and More Resilience. And in the book itself, I talk about this idea of toxic resilience. When I was going through my stress struggle, Alexandra, and that doctor, she said to me, oh, it's just stress, just try to relax. And so I did all of the things that you do to relax. I was a single woman at the time. I went to movies. I had spa days with my girlfriends. I took a vacation, got massages and manicures and pedicures, and nothing really worked. Only when I put my scientist hat on is when I found my way out of stress. And then I vowed to become the doctor I needed during that difficult time. And when I was going through my stress struggle, all throughout my medical training, whenever I would hit a bump in the road and I would feel that stress, I would say to myself, in fact, even when the doctor said, "Oh, it's just stress," my first response was stress. Stress doesn't happen to people like me. I'm resilient because I was living the resilience myth of toxic resilience. In fact, early on in my medical training, I was taught pressure makes diamonds. It was a professor who sat us down. I think it might have been the second month of medical training, auditorium with all of my peers. And he said, "You are going to be embarking on a journey to become a doctor. There are going to be very many difficult moments. And just remember, pressure makes diamonds." And so when I was going through my training, working 80 hours a week, and I would get into a bind, I would tell myself, "Oh, come on, pressure makes diamonds. I'm a diamond in the making." And then my diamond cracked. And so this idea of toxic resilience is why. Now, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we may have had, resilience as a word may not have felt as icky, but like it gives major ick now. So I decided to lean in. And that is why the title of my book and subtitle is what it is.
In the world of psychology, we talk about two kinds of symptoms. We talk about ego-syntonic symptoms and ego-dystonic symptoms, right? Ego-dystonic is like, I go to my therapist or psychiatrist. I'm like, I am having panic attacks. I hate them. Please make them stop. Ego-syntonic is like, it's part of my personality. I don't suffer from it. It feels, maybe other people are noticing it, but I'm not uncomfortable. And I was thinking as I was moving through your book, the way that stress and personality kind of can feel tied, or what you're talking about is that, and I think you're teasing it apart for us as you talk about resilience versus toxic resilience, because for lots of us, especially depending on the role we played in our family growing up or the kinds of ways that we coped with pain growing up, I talk a lot on the podcast, or I have talked on the podcast about the family I grew up in was quite chaotic. And one of the ways that I attempted to cope was by, being in my room with my homework, doing something I called preventative homework. So it really, managing my stress in that way, ended up, it became reinforcing with good grades and, career goals and ambition, et cetera, et cetera. And so in some ways it is the slowing down and the resets are in some ways more uncomfortable than the continuing to do things the way that I've done them. So for a listener like me who is maybe, perhaps tied, right? There's a level at which one is tied to the feeling of being stretched, being all things to all people. Where are some of the places, like where do you find those little like windows, and kind of like the low hanging fruit around inviting people to look differently at the consequences or the price that's being paid for continuing on the way you've been going?
That's a beautifully stated question. And I would say that your brain and your body are expertly designed to handle short bursts of stress. So, in all of the ways that you and me and everyone else has been able to cope with these short stressors, it's great. But particularly now, more than ever, we are seeing an unprecedented rise in stress and burnout because and mental health conditions as well, because we are no longer managing just short, acute stressors. Back in the day, evolutionarily, you will have the tiger in the forest and you either fight or run away. That's the fight or flight response. That's your amygdala. But there's always that respite and you come back to baseline. But now, into this era of modern life, there is no return to baseline because these metaphorical tigers are everywhere. Bills, financial constraints, relationship struggles, climate disasters, humanitarian crises. The list goes on and on. And so what happens is that your brain is continually revved up. So you may be in the state of not even realizing that you have some stress or burnout. But chances are, if you're wondering, like, could this be me? Could I be experiencing stress or burnout? Based on the data, 70% of people, more or less, anywhere from 60 to 74% of people have at least one feature of stress and burnout. That's like saying in a room of 30 people, 21 people are struggling with stress and burnout. So if you're thinking like, could this be me? Most likely you are the rule rather than the exception. And if you're saying, yes, this is definitely me, then just know that you are not alone and it is not your fault. There have been so many things that have been happening all over the world that over the past 4 to 5 years that have really impacted, your brain and your body are not designed to manage this onslaught. And so, yes, we do have some coping strategies, Alexandra, that take us to a certain extent and will help us. But most often than not, and I'm sure you're seeing this in your practice, and I'm certainly seeing this when I go talk to various audiences, it's that those same old coping strategies just aren't working anymore. And that's not because there's something wrong with you or that your brain is broken or that you're weak or all these things that we may tell ourselves, that berating inner critic. It's simply that the way that we are living right now, simply because of all of the things that have just transpired over the past 4 to 5 years, we are both individually and collectively in a new place.
All right. Well, let's talk about the resets. So I went through these 5 resets, I pulled out the one that I would love to hear more about. But if I pull out one and you're like, wait, we got to do this other one, please, please, please.
I love it. I love it.
Okay. So the first reset is getting clear on what matters most. So actually this one, I am putting the ball in your court. Is there a favorite prioritization or goal setting practice that you love? So this first reset is all about prioritizing, right? Not everything can be first on your to-do list or the most important thing. So what would be a practice that you would invite a listener to try around goal setting?
So, when I created the 5 resets, it's really a framework that I used. It's what I've taught thousands of my patients, and it's 5 mindset shifts along with 15 scientific strategies. And so each reset has about 2 to 3 to 4 techniques. And so in this first reset, get clear on what matters most. There are several strategies in there. And I think the main premise of this reset is simply that when you are feeling a sense of stress, it is hard to get out of your own way. It is not you, it's your biology, particularly your biology of stress, because you are driven by the amygdala when you are feeling a sense of stress. And your amygdala is focused on your immediate survival and needs. So by design, you can't get out of your own way because you can't think about a future like 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance, like, oh, how am I going to manage my stress? And what's coming up for me next month? And what can I do preemptively? That doesn't always work because that forward thinking, strategic planning is your prefrontal cortex. So if you put your hand on your forehead, if anyone is listening, you can figure out where your prefrontal cortex is. If you put your hand on your forehead, it's the area right behind your forehead. That's adulting. That's the part of your brain that does all the adulting, strategic planning, organization, memory, complex problem solving. And what happens is when you're feeling stress and burnout at unprecedented levels, like most of us are right now, that kind of goes offline and the amygdala hijacks that area. And so, what you're trying to do with this first reset is to recalibrate. So, let your brain get that prefrontal cortex back online, back in the driver's seat, and decrease the volume of your amygdala. And so there are 3 key strategies in this reset that help you do that. So you are out of that amygdala survival mode and back to your prefrontal cortex so that you can actually create a plan, get out of your stress response, and find a way forward.
Wow. It's such an aha moment for me when you're talking about, sometimes we think, I can only deal with the things that are right in front of my nose because I'm so busy. So I can't do forward looking because everything is I can only deal with it when it's like right here. But what you're saying, you're giving it a little bit of a twist because you're saying actually what's keeping you from the forward looking is the fact that the part of your brain that's in charge is the part of your brain that doesn't do forward looking. So it's like this vicious cycle where the more your prefrontal cortex isn't online, the more you're just dealing with the immediate crisis. But the more you're dealing with the immediate crisis, the more you're not doing any forward looking and forward planning. That's so good. Okay. Second reset is this one's really important about finding quiet in a noisy world. And you really invite us to look at a lot of different noisiness in our world. But I would love for you to talk to us about digital boundaries because you share some research that is horrifying, but I totally believe it, which is that we touch our phones an average of 2,617 times a day. So, okay, digital boundaries, right? We need them.
That statistic, equally shocking. It's funny that we're both in this space of mental health and we both, like that first statistic you shared, 60 to 80%. That was shocking to me. This one as well. And yes, we need digital boundaries because when you think about boundaries and your work with relational connection, for a healthy relationship, boundaries are necessary. We have boundaries when it comes to the relationship we have with our children, our partners, our colleagues, our friends. Every single relationship needs boundaries. And yet we have no boundaries or porous boundaries when it comes to the relationship you have with your digital devices. And that is a major problem. And so, what are digital boundaries? It's simply a way for you to create some spaciousness in the midst of your messy, overscheduled life. And this particular reset, the second reset, find quiet in a noisy world, helps you do that. So one of the things that I often hear from people is like when you're feeling a lot of stress, and I say this too, it's like, oh, get me to Hawaii, or like, I want to just go away for 6 months to Bali for a surf hiatus, right? We all have that escapism and we want to just get away. But the truth is, that's not the reality for many people, including me. We have financial constraints, obligations, responsibilities, and you can't just jet off. And when you come back, your problems are still there. But you can create some boundaries so that you get that mental bandwidth that you are so desperately seeking. And so digital boundaries is one way to do that. Why do I really lean into this idea of digital boundaries? Because when you really think about it, from the minute you get up, and this data is shocking, most of us, over 90%, before your second eye is even open, you're scrolling. You grab your phone, right? That's like, it's your alarm clock. And so you grab your phone and you start scrolling. You can't help it. Again, not you, it's your biology. And, you start scrolling. You look at your headlines, you look at emails, social media, Slack channel, all your group texts. All of these things, they are not benign. There's, in fact, no such thing as mindless scrolling. It has a direct influence on your brain circuitry, your brain chemistry, all the neurotransmitters, the stress hormone cascade, your cortisol, all of that, all before even opening your second eye. And it primes your brain for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Or given your spouse, if you're, in a relationship, before you've given them a hug or before you've, looked at your children's eyes, right? All of that. You've consumed the world's news. Yeah. Your cousin's latest picture of their, right? You've like taken in so many other people's content and the big picture stuff, the little picture stuff. Yeah.
And so you do it within minutes of waking up. You haven't even, your eyes haven't even acclimated to the light of day. And so instead, a digital boundary, I call it a geographic boundary, but the first digital boundary is to keep your phone off your nightstand. This is not about becoming a digital monk, because we know the data shows that it's not abstinence from digital devices that actually improves your health and well-being. What improves your health and well-being is decreasing your reliance on these devices. And so when you keep your phone off your nightstand, then when you wake up in the morning, your eyes acclimate to the light of day. You may say good morning to your bed partner. Maybe you quickly give your children a kiss, or you brush your teeth and use the bathroom and just kind of wake up a little bit. And then you check your phone. It's just a buffer, a few minutes. So keep your phone in another part of your bedroom. Many people say that they have ailing parents or they need to be on call. They can't just leave their phone in another room. That is not what needed. Just somewhere off your nightstand and invest in a low-cost alarm clock instead. And so that is sort of a first digital boundary that you could set. And at night, the other nice thing is when you keep your phone off your nightstand, you're also not scrolling at night. You are then able to just get into bed. Some of the strategies I suggest is like listening to music, some gentle stretching, reading a book, listening to something that's very soothing. And the reason is because there are many things that happen when you are scrolling. There's a direct influence on your brain with your neurotransmitters and the stress hormones. There's also the blue light that's emitted from screens. So there is a real correlation between sleep and stress. Of course, we know that. But there is also the scroll stress cycle. And so all of these there's an interplay throughout the day. And so if you want to have better sleep, so, one of the first tells or the first signs of stress really gone awry is when you are having difficulty sleeping, either falling asleep, staying asleep. You might have fragmented sleep, like waking up multiple times a day, or it's really hard to fall asleep and stay asleep. Or the final manifestation is that you wake up not feeling rested at all. Like you're trying, and that's all because you're not getting the deep therapeutic sleep that you need. And so the first way to do that is to create some digital boundaries so that you can really lean into this idea of sleep being a therapeutic intervention. And so digital boundaries is really a fantastic way. So you can do, so keeping your phone off your nightstand when you're working, keeping your phone out of arm's reach. If you're in a cubicle, keep it in a drawer. At night, many working parents especially, we engage in something called revenge bedtime procrastination.
That's
I
the
know, I
best
do
term
it.
for it. Yes, I love that term. That's fantastic. Yeah.
It's like what happens? So you are working all day. Your time isn't your own. 8 o'clock rolls around, 9 o'clock rolls around. The dishes are done, dinner is eaten, the bath time is finished, everyone's in bed, and you have your moment. It's like maybe 9 o'clock at night. You sit down on the couch, big sigh, right? I'm a working mom. You are too. We know that moment. You're like, oh, finally, me time. You have every intention of going to bed at 10, maybe 10:30. You know that sleep is good for you. You want more sleep. You're stressed. What happens? Next thing you know, it's 1 a.m. and you've been scrolling and you're like, wait, what did I just do for all those hours? And so you want to break that cycle. And so one way to do that, and that whole phenomenon, by the way, is revenge bedtime procrastination. You're not giving yourself any me time during the day. And so your brain and body need a respite. And so they take it at night. And so it's about reclaiming your time during the day. A few minutes throughout the day can make a world of difference. Lots of data to show how brain breaks are really important. And then there's various techniques. Another digital boundary that you could try for revenge bedtime procrastination is a visual boundary. So set your phone to grayscale. It was a game changer when I learned how to do this, when I learned the science behind it. It simply means that you can toggle your phone from color mode, which is what we do to consume, when we're scrolling, to black and white mode. And there's a way to do that. You go into settings, accessibility, display, color filters, and then you get into grayscale. And when you're more advanced, you can figure out on a shortcut. So you just hit a button and you go right into grayscale, hit a button, come out of grayscale. And what that does is it makes scrolling less inviting, less enticing for your brain. And one marketing executive explained it like when you're walking through the grocery store, if you go through the aisle with the cereals and all the cereal boxes were black and white, you'd be like, all right, don't need any of these, gonna keep walking. And so these bright, saturated colors keep us engaged. And it's always in direct conflict with the sleep and the rest you need and you deserve. And so we know that there's this deep interplay between sleep and stress. When you're feeling a sense of stress, you're not getting the sleep you need. But then when you're scrolling, it's also interfering with your sleep. So all of this is to really protect that mental bandwidth and create a little bit more quiet in this noisy world.
Let's move on to the third reset, which is in this one, this is all about our syncing up our brains and our bodies. And you move through everything from exercise to gut brain connection. There's just, the bottom line here is that every single Reimagining Love listener needs to have this book and read this book. But what I was wanting is for you to talk a bit about the role of breath and to invite us into a breath practice that we could even start today.
Yeah. So this particular reset is all about tapping into your mind-body connection. Your mind-body connection is happening all around you like gravity, and you can actually learn to harness it, influence it, and then affect your stress as a result of it to decrease your stress. And so you can tap into your mind-body connection through many things. One potent gateway is your breath. And why is that? It's because your breath is the only physiological mechanism that's under voluntary control and involuntary control. Your brain waves don't do that. Your digestion doesn't do that. No other bodily process is under voluntary and involuntary control. And so one really simple practice, it was one of the first things I learned as a stressed patient of how to tap into your mind-body connection. It's just a fancy word. It simply means that your brain and your body are in constant communication, inextricably linked. What's good for your body is good for your brain and vice versa. We can practice Stop, Breathe, Be. It's a 3-second brain reset, and the instructions are in the name. So we can do it together. You want to stop, breathe, take a deep breath in and out, and just be. That took all of 3 seconds. And when you practice that again and again throughout your day, what happens over time is that you can rewire your brain. You can tap into your mind body connection. That was the first technique I learned when I was a stress medical resident. I would use it when I would knock on the door and turn the doorknob as I would enter the patient's room. And so you can use it as your doorknob moment. We enter and exit spaces all throughout our day, including join Zoom room. You can do that every time you click join Zoom room. Or throughout your day, stop, breathe, be. I used to do it 30, 40 times a day, and you can continue to do that. And over time, what can happen when you practice stop, breathe, be, it gets you out of that anxious what if thinking, like doom and gloom, future focus, because that's what anxiety is. It's a future focused emotion. And it gets you back to what is in the here and the now. And it strengthens your mind body connection over time through neuroplasticity. Again, like that fancy word, which simply means your brain is a muscle, you can then influence your brain and your pathways in your brain for less stress.
On the podcast, we're talking all the time, obviously, about how all of the ways that we relate to ourselves shape our relationship dynamics. And that stop, breathe, be lands so powerfully around as you strengthen your brain-body connection, you have more capacity then to be patient with your partner, to give the benefit of the doubt, like all of the practices we talk about on the show. That is just, it's the training program then, so that then when you're in that moment with your partner, you get to be different than you've been, less reactive, more responsive. That's an excellent stop, breathe, be. That's an excellent, really easy, like there's really no excuse not to be working that into our daily routines.
Yeah, it's like that pause, right? Like what you teach, so much of what you teach is that moment right before you're about to have that reaction. The action happens, you want that reaction, and instead of, you just take a minute. So in that minute, 3 seconds actually, not even a minute, you can practice stop, breathe, be, and then you can react, and you are reacting from a more mindful, intentional place.
Okay, so the fourth one is come up for air. And on this one, I would love to be real selfish on this one because you wrote about task switching. And one of the things I love about my career is that I am doing so many different things. I move from a therapy session to working on a podcast script, to moving into a meeting with my team, to moving back into another therapy session with a client, and there's something lovely about those jobs that we have where there are different elements, but there's a shadowy effect that you write about, which is that sets us up for task switching that ultimately compromises productivity and has an impact on our stress level. So can you tell us a little bit about task switching and some practices to maybe move away from that?
Yes, I would love to. So task switching, let's break it down a little bit. It's multitasking because multitasking is a myth. It's a scientific misnomer, and there is no such thing. It doesn't exist. Your brain doesn't recognize multitasking. What it does recognize when you are quote unquote multitasking, it is doing what you're saying, Alexandra. What it's doing is task switching, doing two separate tasks in rapid succession. Your brain is wired to do one thing at a time. And so when you are quote unquote multitasking or task switching, what it ends up doing is it weakens, ironically, your productivity, decreases your cognition, your memory, your attention, and it decreases your ability to solve complex problems. So multitasking is not the badge of honor you think it is. It is actually detrimental to your brain. And so the antidote to multitasking is monotasking, doing one thing at a time. Whenever I suggest monotasking, like brows are furrowed, arms are crossed, like, oh, please, like, give me a break. Monotasking in this world. But you can apply the science of monotasking to your busy life with the competing demands, and even for you, Alexandra, with the many hats you wear, you can monotask. This is not about doing lots of different things. In fact, you are most likely very productive because you are doing all of these different things. The key is that you cannot do all of these things at once. And so you want to create a workflow around monotasking. So let's say you have 4 tasks that you want to complete in an hour. The old you might have said, I'm going to do all of them. Just bring up all 4 tabs. And I'm going to type, I'm going to work on my script, my podcast script. I'm going to email my team members. I'm going to review the notes, the chart of the client that's coming in next. So you try to do all of the things all at once. Your brain can't handle it. Instead, and not just your brain, Alexandra, anyone's brain, the human brain cannot handle that.
All the brains.
All brains. In fact, even though 100% of us think we are excellent multitaskers, the science shows that only 2% of human brains can effectively multitask.
That's that syntonic dystonic, right? On the inside, it feels productive. Yes.
But it's not happening.
Okay.
So it's not happening. So monotasking. How do you monotask when you have many tasks that you need to complete within a certain time limit? You time block. So what that means is you focus 10 or 15 minutes on task 1, then you take a short 2 to 5 minute break. 10 or 15 minutes on task 2, then take a short break. Same for task 3 and task 4. So at the end of that hour, you have made headway on every single one of your tasks without compromising your prefrontal cortex. And that is really key. So monotasking is the antidote to multitasking, and it can be done. I have monotasked now. I started learning about monotasking and time blocking in medical school. I had to retain copious amounts of information from different subjects. And so I needed a way to do that. So I would set my timer. I had an old school timer in the library of medical school. I would set it. Initially, it was only 15 minutes because I can't, your brain needs time. It's like a skill. So I would set it for 15 minutes and I would take a short walk at the end and walk around and then start the second subject and then start the third subject. But I would take breaks in the middle. And now I could work consistently for about 45 to 50 minutes for a time block without needing a solid 5-minute break. I can't go over 50 minutes. And so that is what I would suggest. Initially start small, 5-10 minutes. It will feel like an eternity when you're focusing on one task.
Do one thing.
Yeah. And that is really the answer. And you will be amazed at your productivity. It will increase, ironically, through monotasking.
I need to wrap us up, but the 5th reset, I do feel like, so the 5th reset is called Bring Your Best Self Forward. And I do feel like the question at the top of our conversation where you spoke about self-compassion really captures this reset. And this 5th reset is really beautiful because it moves into relationships, into really looking at how to live your life in a way, as you said, that where you really feel present in it and grateful for what's going on. So I feel like you gave us something really valuable, at the top of the conversation about that. And I am really glad that you've been here. And I know that our Reimagining Love listeners are going to want to keep learning from you and with you. So will you talk a little bit about where people can get to know you? We will have links in the show notes for how to grab a copy of the 5 resets, Rewire Your Brain and Body for less stress and more resilience. But where else can people get to know you and the work that you're doing?
So you can check out all of my socials across various social platforms. I'm at Dr. Aditi Nerurkar, at DrAditiNerurkar. You can read more about all of the strategies we talked about with my book, The 5 Resets. It's available in 35 countries and 15 languages. And if you want to take a personalized stress quiz to figure out what is my stress score, am I feeling stressed? You can check out 5resets.com. That's number 5resets.com for your free personalized stress quiz.
Thank you so much for taking the time. So, so, so grateful for you.
Thank you so much. I am such a fan of yours and even a greater fan after our conversation today.
Well, to be continued.
To be continued.
Thank you, Dr. Aditi, for joining me today. I know that I'm looking forward to applying the strategies we discussed in my own daily routine. And I hope that you, my listener, are feeling empowered to do the same. I urge you to grab a copy of the 5 Resets if you want to dive more deeply into Dr. Aditi's work and all of the science-backed solutions that she shares, because you deserve to develop tools that can help you and your busy life. Until next time, be well. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.